everyone, and welcome to my podcast, Don't Get a Therapist Yet. Today, I'm very pleased and honoured to have a very special guest. Her name is Esther Wiskerke, and she is a conflict resolution expert. So a warm welcome, Esther, to the podcast today. And can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, your roles and your responsibilities? Because I know you've got a rich experience of so many things. Just tell us a little bit more about yourself, Esther.
Well, thank you, first of all, Wendy, for inviting me to be your guest. Thank you. It's amazing. My name is Esther Wiskerke, and that's straight away a double Dutch, and that's because originally I am Dutch. I'm proud to say that London has been my home for nearly 2 decades. This is truly home to me, but the Dutch accent is still very much there. So a great cat out clause if I get my words jumbled up. But I have lived and worked across the globe and worked in many different sectors, from healthcare, social care to commercials. Surely my life has been quite a path, but I think that would fill the hour perhaps in itself. Whilst living in London in 2015, I completed a master's at the King's College London. My dissertation research got published, which I'm happy to say, and a few more publications followed. And I've been leading a team also for good over 15 years. And recently, a couple of years ago, I founded the social enterprise Symbiosia, which has a very refreshing vision on how the UK can reorganize basically the residential social care model by making it absolutely an amazing destination to live and work and definitely visit. But that again would possibly take up the whole hour. We're not here to that today. So these days I do this in aid for Symbiosia. All my fees contribute to its vision. I offer corporate wellness to any organization, executive manager that has perhaps needs a bit of wellness, and who doesn't need some well-being. And I cover a lot of different subjects, but definitely the one that stands out is the conflict resolution. And I'm delighted to talk to you more about it today.
Yes, and thank you so much for being my guest, Esther. And I know there's lots of different topics you could talk about, but I think as soon as the listeners hear the word conflict resolution, they're here, all ears, saying, help me with this, because as a therapist myself, what I hear a lot of is problems with conflict resolution. I think you go into organizations, and I think am I right in thinking you sort of work with people who've got like issues around polarization? Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a big theme, of course, these days. And you're right. I do, of course, conflicts. We have them all. I'm definitely not conflict-free myself in my personal life at times. Although I'm glad to say I do practice what I preach. But the organizational side of things, the other day I reflected on that, where my interest came, and maybe I may add a little anecdote there from the past. I was a little bit sort of working out in my younger years what to do, and I had ended up basically out of not quite into university yet, and I was placed as an ordinary agency worker, temp, in an office. And the office was in one of those 1960s building, just in an admin department. And I was there just sort of a couple months before they moved into one of those, to be honest, soulless, big or sort of big flashy buildings outside the city center. And what happened was, in the old building, in that room, the room was divided with a glass window. And so that had really separated two teams, which in a sense they were together. And then in that new setting, open plan, of course, everything crisp and juicy. But it was soulless. And suddenly that team came together. Oh my goodness. But of course, the old dynamics were still very much there. And me being a bit of a mouse, I just observed all that, and I saw the people just went like that. And I think that's where the real source is. And like, wow, what's happening here? And I then finally picked up my place. Basically, I studied organizational psychology as a specialist in subject at the human resources, higher professional education, and from there on, it never left me. Basically, that what happens in organizations, how people bring in their personality. How you're not meant to bring in your personal life, but on the other hand, you have to be authentic. You can't completely close the door at home and then end in the professional setting. Of course, we are actually merged into one. And especially with home working these days, it's even harder. You're in your home, perhaps you even hear your relatives. So it becomes much more trickier. And I think, of course, because there is an agenda as an organization, you have to thrive, you have to do well, you have to work together. So regardless of how somebody enters into that team or is part of that office setting, you better get on. But it's of course not necessarily organic, because we always say you don't pick your relatives, but you pick your friends, right? But for sure, that up to an extent, until of course you leave, that is also true for your colleagues. So plus there's the pressure of having to make it work. Whereas your friends, you can say goodbye. Of course, you can say goodbye to your colleagues, but you might not always want to do it. And the extra interesting layer there is that the organization may not want you to do that, because perhaps you're fantastically good at what you do, so they don't want you to leave. And even if perhaps you're in a role where it's a bit more interchangeable, easier to interchange, it's highly costly to constantly recruit new staff. Of course, it's labor intense, inductions, the whole, I'm sure I talked to the converted HR people there out there, who knows how much is involved with hiring. So it gets extra complex. And I think there's an extra incentive then to sort of make that work, that people go to work happy. And it doesn't, nothing under the water is actually, or any undercurrents basically obstructing what needs to be done.
And I think in England, and I'm probably the same in your country as well, the education system doesn't really teach skills like conflict resolution. Yeah, yet for an organization or anybody really who's in a relationship at all, any kind of relationship, sort of could really benefit from these skills. But you're not taught them, are you? You might know all the rivers in England and all the countries in the world, but actually how to actually communicate with your colleagues, your friends, or your relatives, it's not taught. So people are just left clueless when it actually comes to sort of how do you deal with a conflict. And probably the way they deal with it is not very healthy as well. Do you agree with that? And what's your view on that, Esther?
Yeah, and it's how to put it. It's also sort of because it goes much, I would say, nearly deeper. It's not just, of course, how we have a conflict, what you should be saying or not, but I think half of the conflict is having the ability to see the other side of the issue, of the other person. What do they want? What do they need? Having insight in why you are getting triggered, perhaps, why you feel you're stepping up to that conflict. I always say life is full invitations. Hopefully you get amazing, nice invitations in life. But in a sense, sometimes when people invite you to a conflict, that's an invitation too. And here comes the empowerment. You do not have to accept every invitation you receive in life. And that's where I apply also an element of mindfulness, and mindfulness, sometimes people say, so what is it then, Esther? What is it? Is it Harvey Puffy? And to be honest, I never was really into the mindfulness myself, up till my life started to get very interesting, I would say, at some point. So I thought, perhaps there's some learning for me, and this is by now about 10 years ago. And I thought, actually, yeah, mindfulness, of course, we associate it with those lovely Zen stones. And when I deliver training in person, we go through that. And of course, it can be helpful to focus on your breathing, a guided meditation, or, who wouldn't love to receive one of those? That's a deeply relaxing. And that's one part of it. I always say, that you are conscious of what you're doing. Perhaps you're setting your mind to something else, and that can be helpful. But I also say mindfulness is having insight, is having awareness. In the NHS, in social care, often there's this concept of patients making an informed choice. That the doctor might give you all the options. If you do this, if you do that, do you want it, yes or no? If you have capacity enough, you make a choice. They say, the patient had informed choice. Now you can decide which treatment works best for you. But in a sense, mindfulness is your personal informed choice. Once you know what works for you, what you find annoying, how you tend to respond to other people, why that hurts so much, why you feel inflamed. Once you know, then there is, in a sense, there's a little bit of a delay, if you're lucky, if you're practiced enough, and then you can decide how you respond back, which you may then choose to diffuse or to handle perhaps that particular conversation a bit differently. So it gives you extra options. And I think that's where the real power of mindfulness is. And also, by all means, have that conflict. If you want to lash out, if you want to go, wow, but I'm having it anyway, by all means, you are free. You have your capacity to do so. But at least you know yourself that by making that choice or having that conversation in a certain way, there's possibly consequences. And that brings me to sort of the day after, which I also incorporate, or I sort of explain what, or make people aware of that day after. And we shall not go in the big geopolitical situations of today, but there is, of course, often talk of the day after, because yes, you can have that, you can start that war, whether that's unfortunately a real one or a war in words or any conflict. But even for you who started it, there is this day after. There is this longer term consequence, which can have a ripple effect. And again, that comes back to the more you are able to think that through, to see that through, you may then still make a different choice in the here and now. And that comes, if I may link that to my Dutchness, so to speak, we call that polderen. It's unpronounceable. I put it sometimes on the brochure or not. I'm always halfway in two minds about that. The polderen is these square fields of land, just to put it simplistically, where the Dutch, of course, have reclaimed the water over time. The Netherlands, it's mostly submerged. But at some point they decided, well, we need a little bit of extra land. Let's reclaim that land. But there's so many different interests, of course, to play for. Some fishermen like more water, but whereas the farmer wanted a bit more drier at certain times, of course. And the transport wants a nice, they don't want all the sluices, right? They just want to go with that boat, basically. So that and much more. And so that really sort of has geared us up, I guess, a little bit for the extra skill of thinking ahead, because at some point the common denominator is that water. So you can sabotage, you can delay the process, the decision process. You can kind of act as if you agree, but you actually don't. And so you become passive aggressive. But ultimately that water is non-negotiable. And I would argue that for a team, there is a short-term win for yourself, but which is linked also to a long-term. So who wants to go home with a headache caused by work? Your work might be fascinating already. You might hopefully enjoy your job. But the idea is, of course, that with your colleagues, that can actually boost it extra more, or it can really sour your day, even if you like the content of your work. So the work itself can be already quite full on at times, but then, of course, we want it to feel nurtured and supported. So we don't need that extra layer, especially, again, we all have our own personal conflicts in life, right? We don't need anything extra, especially with the uncertainty in life as a whole as well. And then from an organization, there is the incentive that you want to keep that team working, because the moment, again, I give that example to participants. The moment you listen to me, you're there with me, but actually you got a flaming headache, or you're very concerned about perhaps a relationship going on to the rocks. Are you really, really with me? You're not. The other day I did a talk. It was linked to a more like a construction company, and it was around their health and safety. Health and safety. You can, I mean, we have health safety. We have so many rule books, right? I was going to say kilometers of it, but I was using miles here. Miles of rules and regulations. Thou shalt wear this, a hard hat, anything. Take out the plug. But if your mind is not there, because you're already thinking about, you're feeling stressed, and again, the job itself might already be tasking, but that extra stress which conflicts generate, that you don't need it. Nobody needs it, and an organization doesn't need it. So your team needs to be present, as in really present, with what needs to be done. And otherwise, gradually that gets sabotaged.
So just to sort of summarize, because I think you're making some amazing points there, Esther, and I want to just sort of capture them. I think what you're saying about when it comes to conflict resolution, if you learn the skill of mindfulness by being in the moment and fully present there, that really helps you to actually sort of take a moment before you actually respond to a conflict or a situation. You're much more likely to perhaps have that sort of that moment where you consider the consequences as well. And then I think another point you're making is people have a choice in their work, and what you're saying is if there is conflict there, that people can, if they think about the conflict all the time, that's very stressful. They can go home with a headache. Yeah. Whereas if they actually become more mindful and get the skills of the mind, but they're more fully present, so they're more willing to be open and deal with the conflict rather than having a very stressful environment where there's lots of conflict. And again, if you respond in a poor way, you're more likely the day after have even more conflict, which is again exacerbates the sort of the headache. Would that be a fair summary, or have I missed something else?
And I would love to add that being present in the moment is all being well, but it's very much about also that self-reflection.
Yes.
So being aware why you are being triggered, why you feel the need to write that email now and don't apply the 24-hour rule. And also, so you're grieved by a comment, for instance, in microaggression that comes up. You're grieved by a comment, but you choose to go to HR, but actually not have that cup of tea with that person you are grieved by. So why is that? So you might come to extraordinary, if you actually took the time or learned the skill to reflect that on yourself, you might make a different choice. And as HR, you really would possibly want somebody sometimes making that own choice and resolve it in a healthy way themselves. Now, if people, of course, feel terribly disempowered and it is truly a case of bullying going on, that's a different matter. But I would argue that a lot of the grinding conflicts often can actually be self-resolved once you make people aware and you foster the skill that they can do so and they feel free to do so as well. I think you avoid a lot of issues in the past. And early on you mentioned polarization. Polarization, I feel, has truly added an extra layer of complexity. Because when people have strong opposing views, and I believe when we speak about polarization, it truly means it's not just a little bit of, oh, I like this and you like that, but it's like strong. And the ability, a lot of philosophers have spoken about that, the ability to learn comes from being able to truly look inside and being open to what perhaps somebody else said, as as soon as you're closed off, either way, you're no longer taking in, because your outer layer immediately dismisses the other version of it. You in your mind, even if you don't say it to them, oh yeah, well, yeah, right, oh yeah, as if, nutter, all sorts, boom. So it doesn't even come in as much. And people can be quite tense. And when managers are in the team and they think, uh-oh, because they have to work with those people as well. And so they might choose to just maybe not mention it, not putting their foot into it, or avoiding knowing that somebody might be very strong. But that doesn't make it go away. And polarization is truly multifaceted these days. It's no longer, perhaps one belief to the other. It could be about what's happening in the world, of course, as we know it, to be vaccinated, not vaccinated, Brexit, do I dare say? Although I think that feels a little bit like a walk in the park, actually. But of course, it has really caused stir thing. The man, the woman role. Oh my goodness, name something and you can step your foot in it. I make some of these funny, well, I think it's funny because you have to be a bit humorous at times, right? At the moment, I'm running a few posts on 7 ways to use eggshells. Of course, I put some practical things, or you can walk on them, basically, right? And that's what happens with the polarization, that is sort of, we're getting nearly stiffened up, like, we better not. Somebody from the outside, it can be easier. If somebody from the outside comes in, has a sort of disarming session with a team, without necessarily pointing, I would say not pointing the finger at all, because that's part of it, but giving the floor and creating a bit more air, just let everybody have a breather.
Yeah.
And let's just look at that structure. Let's look, what if we did this? What if you did that? And that is how I build up my sessions as well. With any topic, basically, we look at the facts, we look at some research. It's not bone dry, I promise. I can't do bone dry. But of course, the core is bone dry and factual. And then we look at some case studies from the news, safe ones, of course, first of all. And because it's so much easier, isn't it?
Yes.
I hold up my own hand. It's so much easier to point out where the others go wrong. For instance, if I make a quick example, we had the Greek marbles. The Greek marbles from Greece. Greece wanted them back, right, from the Pantheon. It became a whole thing. Is the king supporting it? And the British Museum, of course, wanted to keep them here. Now, in that scenario, for instance, I would call that a safe one, because a lot of people can see the point, but perhaps don't feel overly passionate about the marbles. There's a whole conflict dynamic going on there, basically. But ultimately, they say in the news, oh, but yeah, we wouldn't want to disturb the relations, because they also are thinking about long term. I think at some point they were throwing the toys out of the pram big time for particular reasons. And we explore that. What is the background? Because once you understand somebody's reason why they are picking up that conflict, you're halfway there. Because the danger is, a long time ago, for instance, I had literally 2 members of staff. This was not in the UK, but in another country. They came rolling around into my office with bin bags, and they were fighting over the bin bags. I remember, it's like, wow, why? It's never about the bin bags. It's never about often what is being said. It's that underlayer. It's often like the Maslow hierarchy of need. We have the want. People want something, but often the want disguises the need, right? We want a certain item. Because we think, well, because for instance, I've got some shoes, right? And I put them in as well. I need them. Of course, I don't really need them. Right? There is something about them that those shoes are giving me. That gives an underlay. And once you understand what somebody's drive is, then, to be honest, the conflicts are like butter then. You just cut straight through. That is easy peasy, do I dare say. But when you stay in that upper layer, and yeah, but this break or that project, you're doing this too much and you're taking this time too much. No, it's never about that. It's why that person finds that so important. Why are they getting so upset about it? And perhaps why the others are doing the behavior they're doing. They're doing it for a particular, and it's deep down. Bring that to the surface in a safe way. People.
So I'm just thinking the listeners might be organizations, but they might be individuals who are at loggerheads with a certain person and is having conflict with that person. So I think what you're saying here is one way through is to understand the underlying meaning or reason behind the conflict. It's often a sort of like something much deeper driving that. And is there anything you could perhaps help an individual who's perhaps having a conflict with a friend or a family member, and how they would perhaps go about trying to resolve that? Is there anything there you could help them with?
Yeah, well, for instance, I helped two colleagues not too long ago, and they were. It was quite a sad situation. One had believed they were bullied by the other. It had gone through a semi-formal HR informed process. A little investigation was done. Testimonials were taken from other members of staff. All the formal formalities, basically. Well, the result was there was no case. In fact, perhaps even the victim was perhaps even a bit more challenging than even the other. But in the long and the short of it was, they were informed that there were no grounds for their complaint. But did that person accept that? Of course not. If you believe you are the victim, you're not just believe that is you believe that, right? So yeah, done, but no way done. And so I went into a process with them. And I invited, they were both invited. It was voluntary for them to take part. It was offered to them, and I went first through an exercise I deliver where I highlighted them that they were encouraged to think about 3 positives of the other person as a colleague in several ways, and then that was swapped. That information was shared with the 2 of them, and then they had an opportunity again via set exercise. Now I know that you value me. It makes me feel something like that, whatever they felt. And the same for the more challenges. We deliberately didn't go into the details. That was a no, because again, that's that outer layer where you can run around in circles until the end of days. But again, we were tapping into that under what you find difficult. If you respond to me like that, that makes me feel, and therefore, so we went into that, and that was it was amazing. Both had tension headaches coming into the meetings. Both were, because they were so tense that it was difficult to hide for either of them. So that became aware. And is that what you want, right? And that's just one question, really. And that in itself already, like, no, I don't really. And they had, because they were, especially the one that was the victim or perceived themselves as the victim, they were so locked in. They were so locked into their own truth. Like when people are polarized, this wasn't about polarization as such. It was just more how they experience, and their experience was, of course, for them true, but in their mind they had set up a setting, and that was they were locked into that. But once we were able to break that open, and they were able to see the other person from a different light, and also see the good bits, they started to disarm. And ultimately, they even were able to say, "I'm sorry, I never realized." And they were also humbled by hearing from the other person that they also were seen in a much better light than they thought they were being seen. And that comes always back to those needs. We like to be validated. We like to be seen, and once we feel that the other person is approaching us authentically, then everything flows better. And so that became quite a turnaround. It wasn't easy. It had to be repeated a few times. These things don't go overnight. But we're quite a few months later down the line, and I believe they even are now one of the best colleagues. They are so done, but because the shield is off, and they, in a sense, they are, because they have been opened up, their reality is renewed, is refreshed, and that's lasting. If we, the sort of the impact. Sometimes people ask me, oh, so Esther, what is your impact then? Actually, of course, it's not in numbers. That is, I wish I was a mathematician or accountant. I could do numbers so easily. But the way, the anecdote I think possibly resonates a lot. We come from, of course, from in-person training, COVID, virtual world. I have used online training. Sometimes if you're really interested in a particular topic, it can be very useful to do that at your own time, in your own, whenever it suits you. Lovely if you're hungry for information. But I think sometimes it's been overdone a little bit, and it can become a tick box because it doesn't trigger people. It doesn't deal, with how do they actually respond. And for instance, equal opportunities, it's diversity. It's one of those typical things. If you, of course, I think overall we agree, that needs, that's important. But especially with the polarization, some people, I think, these days are responding strongly when they are being told, do this, like that, and that is then nearly sometimes can have a bit of a reverse effect, because they're, oh yeah, not again. Whereas, of course, if you explore something with a group in the here and now, and you even give I wouldn't say it's not about a platform, because I say it's not so even. Of course, it's lovely if people interact with me, right? It makes everything goes a lot more smoother. But if not, I always say, if not to me, but to yourself, just give yourself this moment as a laboratory. Why are you feeling this way? What would your response be? And does it serve you, that response? What would that response mean for the day after? What for the long term, even after that? How does it fit you as a person, as a whole? So people are invited to reconsider and reflect. And that impact is lasting. Because once, like that particular colleague, like I said, quite a long time, a significant time enough now, that is set. They will not go back to feeling like I said, and that's really invaluable. But how to put that in numbers, I do not know. I wish somebody could tell me.
One conflict at a time, isn't it, Esther? That's really good. And it reminds me of in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the therapies I'm trained in. They use words like thinking habits, and the two it reminds me of, one is mind reading. So people at work assume that somebody is thinking negative things about them. They pretend they're reading their minds. And then I hear a lot of labeling that goes on. So people often label people now as narcissists or psychopaths and everything like that. So I suppose as soon as you see somebody as a narcissist or a psychopath, you're shutting down, aren't you? You're saying that person is dehumanized and it has got no negotiation, has no empathy and all that type of thing. And I wonder whether you come across that at all, where people are just so shut off from that person, and that they're just not willing to negotiate, basically.
Yeah, that came in a recent microaggression training. Actually, I received some beautiful feedback on that. That the team, the organization got me in because they felt they had people of the two polarized views. Some people were like, microaggression, oh, finally we're doing something about that here. And the other sort of, I'm not sure the exact numbers of how half it was, but there was definitely different dynamics there. They were like, oh no, not again. Oh no, no, spare me. And so there we did a beautiful exercise. on, again, how I lead people through sort of microaggressions. We look at the research, we look at how do you evidence it, and we explore it completely. And one participant who clearly had gone into with the view of, oh yeah, now finally we do something, they came to realize that in a sense they microaggressed as much as perhaps they felt sometimes the victim of, right? Because they too had labeled certain people as perceived, like I said, they'd rather go and actually had complained. That's why I think the training came about, to HR, as opposed to, oh yeah, I'm not gonna go and have a word with them first, because they were so convinced in their own truth. And again, that's a complete turnaround, like the other member of staff who perceived the victim for a completely different reason. I think, yeah, that's beautiful. So that is what it does. But you're right. But if you don't, people just stay stuck, unless, of course, somebody chooses to do their own work, go to a therapist. I think I would say everybody should go to a therapist at least once in their life, just to ruffle those internal feathers a bit, right? Create a bit of air, just as a bit of a double check, like, hey, I'm going on this path. Am I perhaps not a little bit too stuck here and there? I think it's good to challenge yourself. But yeah, not everybody is that brave. Not everybody has Dutch courage.
Dutch guy, I love it. But I think the difference perhaps between our roles is I tend to work more with individuals. So you're dealing with somebody outside the room who they've got the conflict with, or the hurt or the trauma, whatever. So it's very difficult you can't bring that person in, really. You can work with this and find ways around it. Whereas I think what you do, you bring the people in the room, and that's you're sort of like a, you help to mediate those sort of conflicts and bring those two people together. So your role is very unique.
Yeah. And I would nearly say that I go one step before. So that 1 to 2 work, or 1 to 3 work, that is in the room. You're right. But like the workshops and the training sessions, they are there to avoid that anybody has to go in a separate room, basically. That is because if you scale up your team immediately, basically, you give them straight away insight, you will avoid some nasty conflicts in the future, basically. So you never have to go into the 1 to or 2 to 1. I mean, I'm delighted to do both, but I think the beauty is when you can prevent. Prevention is better than curing, right? Ultimately.
And what an investment to actually get a team to work well with dynamics and things like that. Because I think, in my experience as a therapist, what happens is sometimes the person reminds them of a past experience, a past relationship, maybe a tone of voice or the way they speak or a certain manner. So they bring all that sort of memory into that current relationship from the past, and feel the same way. Often, like you say, they're triggered emotionally by that memory, and they sort of bring it into the here and now. And that's why I think, like you say, the mindfulness is good, because I think what you're trying to do then is sort of like put that one aside, the past, and work on the here and now with that kind of person. Would that be the sort of another example?
Yeah, because you might, because that, and perhaps if that person would to do a therapy session, indeed they go quite deep. Am I right to say that? You go
Yes,
deep, right? Yes. So it's and going deep, I would encourage. Like I said, everybody needs their therapy at times. But even if you didn't go very deep, but you just become conscious that is why you're doing it, because a quick reminder of so and so, and then it's making that extra step. And now what will I do with it? Because you might still get triggered, but once you gain or you become aware that if I then get triggered and I act on it, that will have this effect, and that will have that effect. And if I do it like this, it will have that. So then you come back to that informed choice. And by all means, do whatever you like. This is it. It's not about the lecture. I think, again, that's where perhaps the strength of it is. It's an invitation to consider. And that can feel quite empowering. But ultimately, again, as a team, you need to get on. You're going to go home. You got your own life. Do you need that extra stress? And that's a consideration. And just having that opportunity to step away from the daily work, hustle and bustle, and to remind people that it's a simple thing, but often with sometimes simple things, it's easier said than done. But just taking that moment can have lasting impact, because people next time they might think twice, even if they haven't gone as deep as in therapy, so to speak, because they suddenly are opening up. They're looking at their own future, as in what does it mean for me? Because ultimately, people, that's that internal need, their team, and of course, employability-wise as well, their careers.
So I think, a key skill you're talking about throughout is this sort of self-awareness and self-reflection, that if you can kind of encourage people to think more about those, about, the awareness of what's going on, what the conflict's about, the deeper level of the conflict, the underlying reason why and everything like that. And whether you're being triggered by a past memory is another thing you're talking about. And also the consequences of your interactions, whether you actually, reach out and make things worse, or whether you spend time reflecting on what kind of response do you want to give, because long term you need to think about the future working with that person and the organization and everything like that. So
and I should add that another thing, so whether to go for the conflict or not, I'm by no means, and again that gets broadly discussed and explored, about always, oh yeah, oh no, I don't want to row with that person, I better not say something. That if you do that constructively, in a sense, then you are trespassing your own boundary. And sometimes something has to be said to make it healthy. So it's not always sort of like, okay, I better zip it, because if you do that continuously, that becomes very toxic in itself for yourself. So there's different angles at it. But again, if we look at that from case studies and structures and exercises, and then because I'm proud to say that the most common feedback I get is, oh wow, this is a lot of food for thought. And the beauty of it is that you don't always know what people are going through, especially like I work with a group, that people already in their own mind know that next time they might do things differently, even perhaps in their private lives. I've heard people say, oh, I'm going to go to my daughter, but I'm going to kind of go that a little bit different this time. Now I realize, because I realize suddenly what I'm doing. So that is the beauty of it, that because you create, it comes from the person themselves, not because they're being told. You create that insight.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, that sort of empowerment, isn't it? And that inviting people as well, given the choice is as well. And I wonder whether there's any situations where I don't know whether you were able to deal with this, whether one person is really trying to resolve it, but another person is clearly not willing to resolve it for whatever reason. They're not willing to come to the training and everything like that. There's almost like they're stonewalled. Have you ever dealt with that, Esther? And any kind of tips you can have on that?
Yeah, this is where daily life is different, of course, from an organization. So if somebody didn't come to the training, I might not personally be aware of that, because if the booking is for whoever is there, and if people don't show up, then they don't show up. But from an HR point of view, if you notice there was such a conflict that somebody is so deep into it, that then it might be worth, first of all, either the manager or myself, we could have a pre-conversation, because there's a reason. There is a reason. So that may need some pre-work, basic, for the resistance. Again, those two colleagues, oh, that was a close call to them not showing up to that, right? Because it is so scary. And fear is often the base for our decisions, or to do something, or often not to do something. And yeah, once you address that first, see what's going on there, then the person might be more ready, and it might be more satisfactory for everybody then, because you have to be open. But I would say, once I have people in my group, then there's people.
I think probably you probably act as a very sort of secure kind of sort of container role. You're neutral. They know that you're neutral, but sometimes a manager might be perceived as not being neutral,
Yes.
or having some sort of dynamic, whereas you've got that neutrality and that skill and that sort of inviting people kind of style as well, where people don't feel as though they're being told what to do, or they're not being punished or anything like that.
Yeah.
Sort of setting it up already to be a much sort of fairer system.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I get away with more. Also, again, I have Dutch courage for sure, and I have definitely dealt with some interesting situations. So I think I get away with being able to say it, but it is also, like I said, like you rightly summarized, it's how I say it. It is the invitation is key, but also it can be very refreshing just to say things as we sometimes, a lot of people feel them. The microaggression, again, some people, I actually dare to say at some point, again, we warm up the group for that. Caucasian, middle-aged, white males, they are, for instance, a group in a way, they are also being microaggressed. Oh, you're privileged. Oh, you don't experience any of the problems I have. Oh, you're not, So in a sense, they are also at the receiving end of it. And a lot of people don't realize that because it's that labeling, right? What you said earlier. But so whereas some people might find it difficult to say, no issue saying that, again, at the right time. It's truly, it's symbiotic. Here comes the word again. It's looking at it a 365-degree angle, whatever the topic is. And it's, again, I would say it's a laboratory, it's an opportunity. If you don't say it out loud, if you don't say it to me, say it to yourself. And just note, if nothing else, just note what you're feeling. And just, the mind, here we go, just let it run those thoughts. But in the end, people start to, because it's fascinating, and it feels often very much a relief to be able to do that, basically, to have the time to do it. It's a real gift, I would say, to have that time.
Absolutely. And another area that I work on a lot is people who suffer from anxiety, and often I talk about workplace situations with individuals, and what happens is, another CBT saying is that people catastrophize, so they go to the worst case scenario again, and that sort of stops them speaking their truth as well, because they predict the worst. Oh well, then they're going to bully me even more, or they're going to laugh at me or dismiss me, or I'm going to get in trouble for speaking out and everything like that. And I wonder how you deal with people who perhaps are very reluctant to speak out, or to fear getting it wrong and things getting worse for them. Any kind of tips on that, Esther?
Yeah, I think if it goes much deeper like that, because ideally the sessions I talk about, I think it should be a bit of a maintenance. It's not a standalone. If they then go back into a team or under, and the culture is not there to replicate that. Of course, people then still have the empowerment to make different choices for themselves. But you really want to foster that. You want the reflective working, you and the openness that perhaps things are not like you think they are about your colleague, about that project, about whatever is going on. That needs to be set as a bit of a cultural, a way of working together. In those cases, if it was far more already in a more advanced stage, I would recommend working with line managers or with senior managers to start there first, and then they can start rolling that out, that openness. And these things take time. It's easy if you drop a plate, it's broken, but try put it. I mean, that's a flick second, right? But try putting it together. My goodness, I don't have the time for that in my life. All the pieces. So the same is once you make a particular error or make a wrong judgment call, or you were not as supportive perhaps to that member of staff, it sometimes can be hard to come back from that, because that person creates then the anxiety. But it can also then be very healing to actually include them in a particular session, because there is, of course, always two flip sides of the coin. Being a manager is not easy. You can only think of one or two or group together, but all those individual people can think about what you're doing, right? And I'm sure they're finding many errors. So again, just to open that up to a group can also be healing, and that they see that they don't label that manager as the difficult one, the grumpy one, the short one, because they too might do that from and a certain element of anxiety, defense, the barriers are up. So yeah, if it's anxiety that deep, also it might take extra pre-work. These things, I'm sure you agree. It's not a one fix shop, right? You can't do one therapy session and say, oh well, that's it then. But even then, during the mindfulness sessions, because sometimes people say, oh, thank you, Esther. Oh wow. Oh, I'm going to do this different. I'm going to do that different. And people sometimes even are anxious to hold on to that. They say, oh, I wish I'd done. I said, this is also the beauty of every moment, every day. You might realize you kind of didn't get it, or you went off track. You can start again.
Yes.
You can actually start again. Forgive yourself. Sometimes, things might be a bit more harder to repair, but still, there's always a comeback, really. So
absolutely, that's a really good point. And I think what you're also saying is there is sort of like quite a few processes in the way you work. You sort of, understanding what's going on in the organization. If there is some more serious or more sensitive areas, it sounds like you have processes in place that you might do a little pre-work, like you say, line manager or as a group. There's lots of different ways you can come in different ways.
Yeah, it depends on what they need, what they need before. Yes, how deep they want to go in a way, how lasting they want to have. How much work is needed.
And another key skill I think that I talk about a lot is problem solving as well. And what I'm hearing, what you're doing is you're offering lots of different solutions in very many different case scenarios. There's not necessarily one solution that fits all. It's your depth of knowledge and your skill is that you can go in and assess a situation and either do some not basic training, but some specific training in, say, mindfulness and everything like that. And that might help one area. But you can go in and say, okay, there's a conflict over there that I need to work in a different way. So it's quite organic what you do, isn't it? There's no it's not like a step by step everything. It's very much working an organization in an organic way and understanding the problems and where you can go in and sort of make a difference. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, what can I say? Nothing is unpredictable as humans. Humans are natural organic beings, so they behave and like you said, one-on-one is one thing. Add another person to it, it already becomes more complicated. Add a whole group, add an organizational structure to it. The dynamics become more and more complex because people respond to the responses of others who may or may not be ready to self-reflect and make informed choices for themselves. So that's where you need more patience and endurance sometimes to let the process play out, basically, or to assess what goes wrong, basically. And it's not always immediately obvious, of course, because of various reasons. People choose not to disclose, for anxiety reasons, for professional reasons, whatever basically is going on. So it's about reading that situation in the right way. But ultimately, I find it overall positive because there's always that common, really people aren't. I mean, of course, you can be unlucky, in very exceptional circumstances they're there. But overall speaking, even the harshest person, they actually are internally a bit suffering. So they still they welcome it. We really don't want to go with a headache on Friday evening or every night. And when we are home, we want to focus on whatever we've got at home, plenty there, and not having that extra layer. So generally speaking, I find once you start, people are quite relieved and grateful even for having that opportunity to resolve.
And by resolving conflicts at work, that person can then go home and, like you say, have less stress in their life. They're much less likely to sleep better, eat better, relax more, and, not be thinking about work all the time. And that, indirectly helps their well-being very much, again, because, again, I speak to lots of people who don't sleep very well because they're worrying about, issues or things at work. So that's, another way. So, Esther, unless you can kind of create little mini Esthers everywhere. So I was thinking your job is so big, there's so much problems in work, and conflict resolution is just such a big area, isn't it? But
but I'm grateful also that people feed back to me, and I sometimes they say, oh, now I've been to you, I'm now also doing it somewhere else. So it has a ripple effect. That is always, oh, it is so humbling to hear, to be honest, when are copying me for the right, and it's always a compliment if you're being copied. That's amazing to hear always. So it is possible. Just
I think a lot of organizations would really benefit from your skills. And I like to listen in my head, but I don't want to get anybody into trouble. So I just keep that thought to myself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Esther. You've given so many insights, and I think probably people will be surprised actually when you think conflict resolution. It's different to what you describe it very differently to what I think people imagine. So that's really, really good. But I think what's really important is, how do people get in touch with you? If you just perhaps give your details now, and then they will be available in the show notes that people can go and look up your details. But how do people get in contact with you?
Well, maybe the simplest way is via LinkedIn. Find my name. I don't think there's many Dutch on LinkedIn with that name in London. So yeah, but with my name, Esther Wiskerke, or symbiosia.co.uk. That's the website of the corporate wellness. And yeah, maybe I can share a few more links. That would be amazing. That's the easiest, to ping me a connect or a direct message. And happy to talk. I would always recommend just to come. I've got a couple links to the introductory call. I think so much easier just to, well, face to face as much as we can get it, right, with these lovely virtual meetings. But of course, people are welcome to email or just send a message. But I'm more than happy to straight away jump into
yes, yeah. Whatever's best.
Yeah, whatever works for them, basically. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Esther, for being an amazing guest.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure people really enjoyed this podcast. And thank you, everyone, for listening.